Imagine a book written 2,300 years ago that reads like a CIA manual. A text so ruthless, so calculated, so politically sophisticated that modern scholars still cannot believe ancient India produced it. This is the story of the Arthashastra and how one forgotten manuscript rewrote everything we thought we knew about power. In the 4th century before Christ, when Greece was still celebrating Alexander's conquests, India was building something far more enduring. A young man named Chanakya walked the corridors of Nalanda, that legendary university where thousands of monks and scholars gathered to study the nature of existence, mathematics, and statecraft. Chanakya was no ordinary scholar. He was a strategist, a philosopher, and a man obsessed with one question: how does power actually work? The Mauryan Empire was fragile. Invasions threatened from the west. Internal chaos weakened the kingdom. And Chanakya believed that survival required more than courage or righteousness. It required a cold, calculated understanding of human nature, economics, military tactics, and the art of deception. So he sat down and wrote. For over 1,500 years, the Arthashastra vanished. No one knew if it had ever truly existed. Scholars debated whether Chanakya himself was legend or history. Then, in 1905, in a small monastery in South India, a Sanskrit scholar named Arthashastra discovered a damaged manuscript. As he translated those ancient pages, he realized he was holding something extraordinary, something that should not have survived, and something that changed everything. The text was explicit, raw, unapologetic. It spoke of spies and sabotage, of taxation and manipulation, of how to sow discord among enemies and control entire populations. Western scholars who read the translations were stunned. How could an ancient Indian text read like Machiavelli, but written 2,000 years before Machiavelli was even born? The Arthashastra contains 180 chapters divided into 15 books. It covers economics, diplomacy, military strategy, intelligence operations, and the art of governance. But what shocks modern readers most is the psychological sophistication. Chanakya writes about how to identify spies, not just foreign agents, but discontented citizens who might betray the state. He describes a system of taxation that adjusts based on a farmer's yield, recognizing that bleeding the poor too dry creates rebellion. He outlines military formations and siege tactics with mathematical precision. But most remarkably, he describes something that modern geopoliticians call the mandala theory, the idea that a king's immediate neighbors are natural enemies, and the neighbors beyond them are natural allies. This ancient theory predicts modern international relations with frightening accuracy. When Chanakya wrote that the circle of states naturally aligns in patterns of conflict and cooperation, he was describing a principle that still governs how nations interact today. He understood balance of power. He understood deterrence. He understood that alliances shift based on geography and interest, not morality. The Arthashastra is not a book about justice. It is a book about survival. When scholars finally translated the complete text in the 20th century, it forced a reconsideration of ancient India itself. This was not a civilization of only poets and philosophers. This was a civilization that produced strategic thinkers as sophisticated as any the world has ever known. The text influenced modern leaders. Some say it shaped Indian foreign policy after independence. Scholars began to understand that the Mauryan Empire under Chanakya's guidance became one of the most organized, efficient, and powerful empires in ancient history. The empire stretched across the Indian subcontinent. Its administrative systems were documented and respected. Its economy was disciplined and strategic. And all of this rested on principles that Chanakya had written down in precise, calculated prose. The Arthashastra survived because it was copied, preserved, and passed down through generations of scholars who recognized its value, even when the rest of the world had forgotten it. Today, when we study geopolitics, we study Machiavelli in the 16th century, Hobbes in the 17th, and Kissinger in the 20th. But we rarely speak of Chanakya, who articulated the same principles 2,000 years earlier. His insight that nations pursue interest rather than virtue remains painfully relevant. His understanding that stability comes from strength, not wishes, still guides foreign ministries. His observation that allies and enemies are often defined by proximity rather than principle still explains why neighboring nations struggle while distant ones cooperate. In our world of rising tensions, of cyber warfare, of economic sanctions, and of competing superpowers, we are living in exactly the kind of landscape Chanakya described. The specifics have changed, he wrote of cavalry and spies on horseback, we have drones and digital intelligence. But the underlying principles remain constant. A state must be strong. A state must understand its enemies. A state must sometimes act with ruthlessness. And a state must always remember that the world is made of competing interests, not universal morality. The Arthashastra teaches us that power is not a dirty word. It is simply a reality. And understanding it is the first step toward navigating it wisely. If this story moved you, if it made you see ancient India in a new light, then subscribe to our channel. Because we have hundreds more stories of Bharat, of warriors and philosophers, of kingdoms and ideas, of wisdom that shaped the world. Subscribe now, and let the past illuminate your present.